This book is intended to open up to a wider circle of intelligent readers the comprehension of the Divine Comedy, the essential facts in the history of culture out of which the poem takes its rise must first be considered. Then the poem itself in all its poetic originality, in its unique character as a work of art. In the first part, the background of the poet in the religion, philosophy, ethical and political thought, and imaginative literature of the Middle Ages is discussed. In the second part, his work alone. Hence, the second part can best be enjoyed. Apart from the first, for the first part takes for granted a thorough familiarity with the poem, and those who do not feel that they possess this familiarity might very well begin by reading the second part first. The introductory chapter on Dante and Goethe may also be left to the last, at least by those who do not bring to the reading a considerable acquaintance with both poets. But Dante sums up so many sides of his own age, and the study of his background carries us over so wide a field that a work such as this may very well serve as a gateway to the study of medieval culture in all its manifold activities. It is for this reason that I have submitted to the suggestion of others and permitted this book, which in the original is simply called to go forth in its English dress under the more general title of Medieval Culture, an Introduction to Dante and His Times. It is that in a real sense, perhaps, but only as an afterthought, which in the original is simply called Die Göttliche Komödie, to go forth in its English dress under the more general title of Medieval Culture, an Introduction to Dante and His Times. It is that in a real sense, perhaps. It is that in a real sense, perhaps, but only as an afterthought and within definite limits, for my primary aim has been to bring home to the mind and heart of my readers the great poem of Dante itself. The present work has been translated from the second German edition, which differs materially from the first, especially in the interpretation of the Purgatorio and the Paradiso. The translation has been carefully revised by Professor Dino Gongiari of Columbia University, who has given it the benefit of his wide knowledge of medieval thought. I have been as sparing as possible in citing authorities, for I did not wish my narrative to be swamped by references and footnotes. Even the references which appeared in the original have been for the most part eliminated in this translation, since they were so largely concerned with German authorities. In place of these, my friend Mr. J.E. Spingarn has kindly prepared for the benefit of studious but inerudite readers a bibliographical note, which is intended merely as a guide to the literature available in English, but which indirectly, by reference to ample bibliographical material, points the way to the whole literature of the subject. I had hoped that he would write an introduction to this translation, but he felt that a bibliography would be more useful to the reader. It would afford me great pleasure if those who speak the noble tongue which has produced a vast literature he has there recorded would give a friendly welcome to the present work. Karl Vossler. Goethe's Faust, and Dante's Divine Comedy. One cannot speak to any cultivated German. One cannot speak to any cultivated German of Dante's Divine Comedy without reminding him of Goethe's Faust. To compare the greatest Italian and the greatest German poem has become a German habit since the days of the Romantic movement, and is not without justification, not so much because of any actual similarity or of a common subject, not so much because of any actual similarity or of a common subject matter as because of an internal and, for that very reason, profounder kinship between the two works. Not that the Divine Comedy had ever exerted a decisive or inspiring effect upon the form of Faust. It is in vain that the attempt has been made to find the Dante in Faust. The literary influences are trivial and external. At one prominent point, however, the inner kinship which unites all great creations of the human mind is powerfully revealed in the poem. And here, at a culminating point in each work, a mystical and loving greeting is proffered by the German to the Italian genius, by the modern to the medieval artist. All things transitory, but as symbols are sent. Earth's insufficiency. Here grows to event the indescribable. Here it is done. The woman soul leadeth us upward and on. Last lines of Faust, Taylor's version. All things transitory, but as symbols are sent. Earth's insufficiency. Here grows to event the indescribable. Here it is done. The woman soul leadeth us upward and on. Gretchen and Beatrice clasp hands. In both it is loving self-devotion, pure womanliness, which grips us and uplifts us to the stars. But only in this final and symbolic significance do the two women meet. But only in this final and symbolic significance do the two women meet. Elsewhere, their ways run wide apart. If to use significant round numbers, we select the year 1300 for the Divine Comedy and 1800 for Faust. 5 centuries intervene between the former and the latter. Within this period are included the 3 mightiest movements of modern history: the Renaissance, the Reformation, and the Age of Enlightenment. All 3 taken together signify a continuous and progressive liberation of the individual from the universal, or, if we will, from the Catholic norms of the Middle Ages. In the Renaissance, the sensuous and artistic imagination asserted its proper rights. Through the Reformation, religious and ethical feeling, and through the Age of Enlightenment, philosophic reason gained a like victory. The Faustian man emerges from this complete liberation, freed from the bonds of society, of the state, of the church, and of the church, with law and fate enthroned in his own breast, reaching out Titan-like into the infinite and superhuman. Nevertheless, and her reign, the demands of a newer time announce themselves. Faust's boundless will overreaches itself, entangles itself in agonizing guilt. Only through renunciation and self-limitation is he slowly restored to the circle of useful social activity. When he puts himself at the service of human society, he is uplifted into the company of the blessed, insofar as the conscious and voluntary return of an individuality freed from fetters to its historically determined pale may be characterized as romantic and reactionary. The second part of Faust is romantic and reactionary, but it is not so. But it is so not through aberration or weakness on the part of the poet, but rather because of the inevitable development of the mighty epoch-making poem itself. from the storm and stress of unbridled and all-sided exertion. His pathway leads fast to a consciously purposed social and moral activity. Faust's headstrong will is gradually purified and clarified. Until at last he sees but a single goal before him, to win from the ocean a bit of land and to make it fruitful. I only through the world have flown, each appetite I seized by the hair, as by the hair. What not sufficed me, forth I let it fare, and what escaped me, I let go. I've only craved accomplishment, my delight. I only through the world have flown, each appetite I seized as by the hair. What not sufficed me, forth I let it fare, and what escaped me I let go. I've only craved, accomplished my delight, then wished a second time, and thus with might stormed through my life. At first 'twas grand completely, but now it moves most widely and discreetly. The sphere of earth is known enough to me. The view beyond is barred immutably. A fool who there his blinking eyes directeth, and his clouds of peers a place expecteth. Firm let him stand and look around him well. This world means something to the capable. Why needs be through eternity to wend? Therein lies a limitation, but not a constriction of the will, a subordination, but no sacrifice, a free individuality. By setting definite goals before him, he does not break his own will. He rather purifies and strengthens it. But if we interpret romanticism and reaction as remorseful self-destruction, mystical contrition, and weary homesickness for a Gothic medieval refuge, then there is not a romantic or reactionary fleck in Goethe's poem. Remorse as a lasting condition, penance as an end in itself, weariness as a luxury, enfeebling self-contemplation, all of this, not a trace. On the contrary, just what rescues a hero and thwarts the devil is the restless, never wearying activity of the will. The same titanic vigor which threatened to down him now exalts him. To be sure, still doth man err while yet he strives, but the man who ever toilsome strives, him only can we save. So the struggling will is a source of both evil and good. This double nature of the will is set forth by the Pater Profundus in an occult figure. Around me sounds a savage roaring, as rocks and forests heaved and swayed, yet plunges bounteous in its pouring the wealth of waters down the glade. Appointed then the veils to brighten, the bolt that flaming struck and burst, the atmosphere to cleanse and lighten, which pestilence in its bosom nursed. Love's heralds both, the powers proclaiming, which I creative us enfold. The highest form of the will is life-giving love, its basest aspect. Oh, destructive hatred! Viewed from this side, Faust reveals itself as the poem of the supremacy. The supremacy of the will, and the purification of the hero is accordingly accomplished through deeds, action, events in the reality of everyday life. The theme of Goethe's poem is the same as that of Dante's. It is to use Kuno Fischer's words, the fall and the redemption of man. This identity in the fundamental idea uplifts Goethe's Faust to the Divine Comedy and justifies the comparison with Dante. The treatment of the theme, however, by the medieval poet is essentially different. The scene of the fall and of the redemption lies in the other world. The whole evolution of man occurs not in the tangible world of reality, but in a dreamlike vision, in a dreamlike vision, in a dreamlike vision. While Faust enfolds a human life from the fresh vigor of manhood to blind old age. Ooh, the fresh vigor. Ooh, the fresh vigor. The fresh vigor of manhood. The fresh vigor of manhood to blind old age. The events of Dante's poem occur in the other world within the narrow limits of an Easter week. In short, the Divine Comedy is a vision. Faust is a drama. But the vision is a favorite literary form of the Middle Ages. The noisy reality of life had for them only a subordinate value. The noisy reality, the noisy reality, the noisy reality. Reality. Had for them only a subordinate value. Only when beheld through the veil of vision does existence acquire its full meaning. Only when beheld through the veil of vision does existence acquire its full meaning. Merely a phantom is all that is mortal. Thus Faust voices the wisdom of the heavenly choir. It is not the wisdom of man in this world which demands above all. Above all, moderation, and utters the warning. A fool, who there his blinking eyes directeth, and his clouds of peers a place expecteth. With Dante it is quite the contrary for him. To all transitory things on this earth are but phantoms. His sin had consisted precisely in this, that he took seriously in earnest present things, le cose presenti, and allowed himself to be fettered by them. In sharp, curt phrases, Beatrice characterizes the moral condition of this sinner. Thou oughtest verily at the first shaft of things fallacious to have risen up. Thou oughtest verily at the first shaft of things fallacious to have risen up to follow me, who was no longer such. Thou oughtest not to have stooped thy pinions downward, to wait for further blows, or little girl, or other vanity of such brief use. But instead of uplifting himself after the first blow of misfortune, that is, after Beatrice's death, instead of following in the footsteps of her who was now dead, toward the contemplation of eternal truths, instead of renouncing all earthly ties, and into ways untrue, he turned his steps, pursuing the false images of good that never any promises fulfill. Thereupon Beatrice complains, nor prayer for inspiration me avail, by means of which in dreams and otherwise I called him back. So little did he heed them, so low he fell, that all appliances for his salvation were already short, save showing him the people of perdition. Through the delusion of his reason came the fall. Through the delusion of his reason came the fall. Through its through its restoration, his redemption. In such a process of purification, instruction, penance, scrutiny, and every kind of remorseful check upon the will. Those ascetic practices which in Faust are hardly mentioned play a leading part. Viewed from this side, the Divine Comedy is a poem of the unfolding of truth. The Divine Comedy is a poem. Comedy! It's the poem of the unfoldment, of the unfolding of truth. Here lies the profound distinction between the two poems, a distinction which has its roots in historic conditions. In the one, the control and discipline of the will. In the other, the unfolding and elaboration of truth in the form of a vision. Kuno Fischer has expressed this contrast clearly when he says, despite the similarity of their themes, the distinction between Dante and Goethe, between the medieval and the modern poet, lies here, that for the latter, life itself is a mighty cleansing fire. The world itself is a great purgatory, and the steps in the development of a noble nature are themselves a path to its redemption. The distinction comes clearer if we consider the political aspect of the two poems compared to the eternal problems of the lone human soul. The controversy of the empire and the papacy become a mere masquerade. Goethe accordingly threats these antiquated powers humorously and ironically, but for Dante, the world, empire, and the church constitute the great divine vessel wherein the ideals of the individual calmly rest beside those of the community. Everything is contained within this vessel, with nothing outside of it. And even if the entire structure has collapsed, yet it abides as an idea, and it is to be measured accordingly. Therefore, Dante treats the political conditions of his day with holy wrath. But the political future, which the practical Faust strives to reconstruct in miniature on the border of the crumbled empire, is viewed by Dante with the nostalgic gaze. Nostalgic gaze of an enraptured prophet. Of course, such generalizations do not exhaust by any means the infinite variety of a great work of art. Faust, as well as the Divine Comedy, has other sides, other relationships. It is not all action, not all exertion of the will, stormy activity and drama that rise and fall in Goethe's poem. Indeed, its lack of action and corresponding undramatic quality, have been pointed out by some critics. Much of its contents is merely imagery, symbol, intimation, instruction. Gradually, Faust makes his way out of the fury of action, lets the whirl of life go rushing by him, and is no longer himself carried away by it. The poet by degrees assures him a freer foothold over and above passing events in his desire to unfold before his hero's eyes the world in its fullest extent. The youthful Faust acquired wisdom through suffering. Grown old, he obtains it through contemplation. And what does he behold? Not always historical events, but often mere symbols or even allegories. His experiences become visions and so assume the artistic forms of the Middle Ages. What, for example, does the Helen episode offer if not a picturesque enrichment and artistic rather than an ethical education of humanity? Oh, an artistic rather than an ethical education of humanity. Even the last and mightiest, a thoroughly practical decision of Faust no longer arises out of the pressure of reality and through the application of willpower, but springs, almost in jest, out of a discussion with Mephistopheles. In fact, this decision itself is in truth only a symbol. Were it interpreted in a narrow, literal sense, it would show but a wretched doom. Faust, the Titan, ending his life as a landed proprietor and colonist. The background and the scale of action have grown so large that they can only be grasped. by symbols and concepts. The background and the scale of action have grown so large that they can only be grasped by symbols and concepts. The pictures become more and more transparent and dimmer. Ever more mysterious grows the connection of the incidents and the drama. The colorful passions surging against the control of the will have disappeared. And a mighty reason now rules and illumines the poetic world of the second part. In it there is much that can no longer be grasped intuitively, and that reveals itself only to the few who are familiar with the poet's philosophy. A mystical ceremonial, sanctifies the brilliant fantasy. The sounding verses still glide on, but in the heart of the poem there is an ever